welcome to another episode of Connecting Conversations with me, Carla, your host, and we're delighted to be joined today by Alex. Alex, how are you doing? Thanks for being part of our conversation today.
Doing great, thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. Now, tell us a little bit about yourself. You don't have to get into too much detail if you don't want to, but just a general thing about who you are and kind of what you do would be great.
So I've very recently, within the last 3 weeks, have gone freelance as a videographer and photographer and video editor. Before that, I was working in church ministry for about just over 5 years, since like 2018, doing media stuff and all that kind of stuff. And then I kind of felt led to try something new, which was really scary, and I fought it off for a long time. But in the end, I had to do it. I just took the leap, and ever since I have, it's been really good, and I've seen a lot of opportunity come my way, which has been amazing. Yeah,
That's really exciting. I love that. And I think it's really important to kind of go back and really evaluate how we take those steps from one season or transition to another. I love that you said quite honestly there, and I appreciate your honesty there. Just like I put it off for a while before I knew to take the leap.
yeah.
Why do you think, as a general thing, we struggle to kind of make those transitory kind of jumps?
I think it's different for different people. I think for me, it was a fear of quote unquote doing the wrong thing. Especially within, I don't think even just within faith communities, Christian communities, that even within the world, there's a thing of like perfectionism, and we kind of make life very like high stakes, and we think everything has to fit into this neat box, and it has to look a certain way and be a certain way in order to be socially acceptable or whatever. And I think for me, it was a thing of like, well, I feel like I'm meant to go. I feel like I'm meant to do something new, but I don't know 100%. And because I don't know 100%, that's not good enough. So I'm just going to sit on it and, not take any risk. And so I think for me, the journey was about learning to be comfortable with the uncomfortable and learning to take risk, which risk is rarely it's ever like glamorous. It's quite uncomfortable, and it's a bit it doesn't make you feel good, and it kind of doesn't ever look the way you think it will look, but it's ultimately where you'll grow the most. I think that.
I really, really like that. And I love that you said that even outside of you're someone that comes from kind of like a mindset and a philosophy to do with your personal faith.
Yeah.
But I really think that we don't need to look far, but like even outside of those that belong to a community like that might feel similarly about changes and shifts. Like they're unavoidable. And yet you would think that perhaps because they're unavoidable and everybody's doing it, there'd be more of a kind of ease or comfortability talking about it, processing it, and just engaging with it. But that isn't the kind of way that I see commonly.
Yeah.
Like in terms of, you mentioned that it's the whole element of risk. Why do you think like we are so generally, there's some people that are really not risk averse and they just jump in and love the gray, which I find interesting. I'm not, I think those are quite niche people.
Yeah.
Small percentage, but what is it about risk that we feel so fearful? Because are these really matters of life and death kind of risks? And what are we really risking?
Yeah. It's weird. It's almost like I was thinking about the idea of our survival mode as humans. And when I look at like, particularly like the journey in the Bible in humans, so much of it is about essentially God saying, listen, you're meant to be separate from animals. And animals are all about survival. All they want to do is survive. They're constantly scanning their environment for risk. They're constantly in a lack mindset because they're like, where's my next meal going to come from?
Right.
I have to protect myself. I have to be aggressive against people to protect myself. And God wants us to like move away from being like animals, because we're not created to be animals, we're created to be humans and in his image. And I think in his image, there should be the fullness of safety. And if we can come to a place of safety within communities, within family, within God, within ourselves, we'll be able to take more and more of those risks and those leaps, because we're not constantly in this survival mode. I think when we're connecting our hearts with other people, with God, whatever, I think it diffuses and takes out the heightened high stakes energy of risk. Yeah, I don't know if that quite answers it, but
it's definitely one area of that. And I think, I don't know about yourself, but I think, like, for me, I think it's never been about life and death where my fear of transition is kicked in. It's kicked in about, like, fear of failure or getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And, like, it's really interesting because if I look back, I had such a strong sense from a young age of overdeveloped sense of responsibility. This might be an older sibling thing.
Yeah.
But, like, every decision, I kind of was brought up with a concept like, what you do now matters. What you say to people matters. And when you're thinking about that, and that's kind of the mindset that you are kind of taught from. And I think, like yourself, I also come from a faith background. So my philosophy is like, don't just think about today, think about legacy, think about impact, think about what am I depositing in another individual or in another opportunity, and I might reap that at another stage. And that could be good or bad things, right?
Yeah.
So with that kind of mindset from a really young age, I think that kind of had me a little bit scared, because I'm a kid, I'm trying to figure stuff out. My front, cortex has not developed yet. But there was, like, a strong sense of responsibility. Like, I just need to be mindful even about my relationships, how I navigated friendships. Like, what type of mark am I leaving here? What type of advice? Because I know that these things really impact people. If we're to look back, and this is where we're probably going to take a bit of a turn in the conversation, like, would you say, like, there are some friendships that have really kind of molded or been so defining in terms of the person that you are today?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I'm similar to you in terms of growing up with that kind of sense of responsibility. I don't quite know why, because I'm not the older sibling, so I don't know. I don't
That's
really know where that.
interesting.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. But I just remember, like, even as a young child, maybe like, I don't know, 9 or 10, feeling really like a lot of high stakes energy about life. And I felt like I grew up very quickly in a lot of ways. And yeah, I think it was a good thing in that I matured fast, but also it wasn't so much of a good thing because I feel like I was a little bit too risk aware. And I don't feel like I necessarily took as many risks as I would like. But yeah, but in terms of, like, friendships and how they've marked me, I would say, particularly in my 20s, you really I feel like I've just been stretched a lot throughout my 20s, and I feel like there's been strategic people who have come into my life at different points that I really needed to sort of edge me towards becoming less focused on the risk and the high stakes nature of life, and more pushing me gently towards, you can take this step and it's not going to be life or death, which has been really valuable for me. Yeah.
I love that. I think definitely both good and bad for me personally, in terms of, like, but the friendships probably more so than romantic relationships growing up. It's the friendships that I think have really kind of impacted my mindset, impacted how I interact with other people. And, like, for me, for example, when I think about friendships, even through, like, university time, which is where I think a lot, that's the first experience of, like, independence and adulthood, is when you encounter that dynamic of your life, was during university.
Yeah.
And some of the relationships and friendships there, they really taught me about the world. They taught me
Mm.
about what it means to be an almost just like, oh gosh, like there's more than one way of thinking and approaching, because all of these people from all over the world, it was a tiny global village, so you have international students,
Mm.
came together. And
Yeah.
I grew up in a tiny village in the UK, so small, if you blink, you'll miss it. And then I went to like a Middle English boarding school as well. And it was 500 students. So literally, it was such a fishbowl environment. So the
Yeah.
thoughts and the ways of seeing the world and how you think you fit in the world was all determined by that. Fast forward to university, 18 to 21, it just blew my mind. Like it exploded my concept of like, there's more than one way to live. There's more than one way to think. And then also, because you're still figuring yourself out, it was that
Mm.
crossroads of like, some of these relationships, when they didn't go well, it really kind of set a different kind of bruise.
Yeah.
Ended up like impacting, like maybe I won't be as open next time, or
Yeah. Yeah.
how I've navigated trust and stuff was kind of formulated there. I wondered if like
Mm.
you had any experience with that, or maybe you're just like, oh, I'm just alone with that one.
No, I think weirdly, like I found I reached that point after university. So I felt like when I went to university, everyone, well, at least within the people that I knew, I felt like they all thought the same and had a lot of the similar views and all these kinds of things, and the way that they did life, it was all very similar. And I think I was quite naive in thinking like, oh, well, this is just the majority of people. And it wasn't until I left and then I started to, I think, work and I feel like I understood the world a bit better, and I feel like I started to understand like other people, um, different views, different cultural backgrounds, these kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And like, what was that like, especially when you started to mix with other cultures? If it was like everyone's like me, what was that adjustment like? Because if you look at Britain,
Mm.
like somehow or another we are connected to other cultures, whether it's an uncle or an aunt has married someone from a different country or a
Mm.
different culture. Like, how did you find that adjustment? Like, oh, actually, my world is now living next to diverse, people and diverse cultures
Yeah.
and ways of thinking.
It's weird because like growing up, I like again like with church background, I was always exposed to like people of other cultures, but I don't know if I really, explored much about their culture just because, you're young or whatever. You don't really necessarily pay attention to everything like that. But yeah, as I got older, um, became friends with your husband, people like him. And then I started to understand like a lot more about like other cultures, like as an adult, and actually understanding it and comprehending it for myself rather than just being a child. And yeah, like understanding that people have different backgrounds, different experiences that can shape you for better or for worse, which really opened my eyes in a big way, especially within church culture, because I think growing up, I always kind of thought everyone would kind of think the same, look the same, because it's coming under like one belief system. But I think the way that that belief system can be expressed can actually be really different within different cultures and backgrounds.
I think that's so true. I think in terms of religious environments like that, or in faith
Mm.
environments, you probably find maybe more opportunity for diversity. Like you say, the misconception is, okay, just because we all come from the same philosophical belief system,
Yeah.
it does not mean that everybody's the same way, which is interesting that that seems to be a space where one way of thinking or one kind of like basis or foundation of philosophy is translated, accepted, and executed, but in such varied ways in
Mm.
one place, which is phenomenal. And I would say, like, do you think, like, we look back to start our parents' generation, there was a lot less diversity then. And
Yeah.
back, like, one more step back, it was less diversity, even less diversity then. Like,
Mm.
would you say in your experience that you've seen through maybe hearing narratives from your own parents and then seeing in your own life that society has changed in terms of our attitudes of integrating with cultures? And if so, like, how has that kind of been viewed by you, experienced by you?
Yeah. I think I was quite blessed because I've always had exposure to a lot of other cultures even within my family. So like, um, have some cousins that are like mixed race, uncles who are black, and then married to white people. So it's kind of like, a mix of cultures. And I remember my dad telling me that like when he was younger, his family, they had quite a large family. There was like 10 of them, like 10 kids. They would all mix with a lot of the other families of different cultures. And he remembers thinking, like, oh, that was actually quite unique for them. I don't quite know why they did. This was like in the 60s. I imagine it might have been because my grandmother was a teacher, so she probably had more exposure to like a variation of students and stuff. But thankfully, like I never really felt like I had a family that was, I don't know, I don't want to say like wary of other cultures, but you know what I mean? Like they were always kind of just open,
Yeah, but I think like
and
if you don't,
mixed.
you only know what you know, right? So even when you
Yeah,
talk, it is I think fair to say that. I know
yeah,
sometimes we're kind of concerned about, is this going to be offensive to something? Like the reality is there's an adjustment period if it's not been something that you've been exposed to or educated on. So like I
mm,
think that's really fair to say that there's a time when people were fearful about what they didn't know and all they
yeah,
knew, and difference
yeah,
in how we speak to each other and how we celebrate deaths. Like funerals
mm,
are vastly different depending on
yeah,
which culture you come from, right?
yeah,
How you make your food and the smells that come with it, and the what
mm,
happens around how people integrate around things like food, and how they view things like marriages and family,
yeah,
and how they navigate that together as a
yeah,
family, with extended family, in nuclear families. Like
mm,
if you don't know, you don't know, and that's frightening if it's something that's really different to what you've been kind of raised with, which I think is
yeah,
fair.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I
And
think even for me, like I've always been, I think, quite interested in a lot of other cultures. I've never really, I I I find it hard to believe that some people are so or defensive or like
mm,
suspicious, quote unquote, of other cultures. Like I just have never really had that mindset, thankfully. And I'm always like, with my friends, I don't know whether they're from different nations of the world, Nigerian or whatever, like I'm always like interested in their food and their culture and understanding how they raise kids and all this kind of stuff. Because it just in I feel like it makes your life more rich because
mm,
you have more to draw from, um, rather than just being in your narrow box and being like, oh well, I'm gonna live my life the way that I've known because of my parents or my grandparents. But actually realizing that there's value in everything in every culture, and there's also stuff that you might want to leave. But that's the case with my culture, with anyone's culture.
yeah, that's so good, and I think that's such a helpful approach, because I think depending on, like, I think you mentioned earlier that your family's had experience of really integrating with cultures in a
Mm,
family kind of way. That makes things quite different, rather than
yeah,
someone that's the step outside that circle in acquaintance or professional or even friendship. And it, like the way you've mentioned in terms of that, really helps to educate you on, like, I see how it works. It's okay.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
definitely.
Do you think like the way that society is going, that we're becoming more embracive with diverse cultures and mixed families? You've seen it in your own, but like, do you think we're going to become more like that? Or do you think actually we're at risk of becoming more divided?
No, I think ultimately it's going to lead to being really good. I think it's one of those things where like I forget like how it really wasn't a long time ago in this country and like countries like America where you had like segregation, in the 50s and 60s. So that's really not that long ago. And you think about like extreme division that there was between cultures and races and how far we've come from that. And obviously it's not perfect, but I feel like it's gotten a lot better. And there'll always be some degree of pushback, I think, against that, but it's still kind of taking ground, I suppose, which I think can only be for good, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I really, really like that. And in terms of like, I feel like we see more and more, both on like, I think corporate levels and in
Mm,
companies and in organization, kind of like, it seems like we've kind of woken up to the fact that we need to be properly and authentically integrated more with diverse cultures, like diverse leadership teams, diverse faces on, you know, key public figures or immediate role models. Like, it needs to reflect the people.
Yeah.
And I think like that journey, like you said, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
But like seeing how, I think on the ground in what you've mentioned, like we have family members that are from diverse cultures.
Yeah.
I have community that is actually full of diverse cultures.
Yeah.
It really helps kind of like to build the blocks. What would you say as like a piece of advice to someone else who maybe like fits more of like your profile, you know,
Yeah.
like middle English, Scottish, sorry, I won't forget it. Like representing UK, but in its most traditional form, should I say, in terms of embracing, navigating the diversity that we have truly reflected in our nation?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think, I guess for me, you can look at something like an English football team and you can see a diverse range of people. And I always love to see the English football team, and you can see people of all kinds of skin color, but they're all English. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's that thing of like this idea of like what it means to be English. Why, you know, why does being English have to be synonymous with, you know, looking a certain way? I think, you know, culture can expand throughout any kind of race, for example. And I think if you can see, you know, someone who looks different to you, who has, you know, roots with another culture, but also shares in your own culture, particularly like within like football or something like that, you can quite easily build connection with those kinds of, you know, with people. And yeah, and see that like there's a lot of similarities. And yeah, just having like an openness and a curiosity. And it's actually, like you said before, like it's actually okay to like not know and to ask questions.
I think you raised such a great point there, because I think I encountered a challenging moment where I think that tension was at play a little while back. So, you know, I'm someone who's born in South Africa, but I've been here literally like my whole life. My first 9 years were there, but I've been here like 30 years now, 31 years this year, which is crazy, just crazy. And I find it interesting sometimes when I speak with other South Africans and they find out that I'm South African, the immediate thing is like, no, but where's your loyalty? Who are you? And having to like there is a discomfort or just like a huge tension about like, what's my national identity then? And I would say like, I might have been born in another place, but my cultural identity is actually English.
Yeah.
This is where I place myself. And
Yeah.
more than because like my mindset has been raised here, my ideals, my philosophies, things that I hold dear, like I am observant to things that are to do with England. I've lived here so much. My approaches, like things like, you know, they laugh about us when we're at the airport or anywhere else in the world, spot the English, is because we'll queue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those things, like I like the sense of order that we create here. I do like the sense of how we speak to one another, and you know, those kinds of elements. I love an English summer. Like there's nothing like it. I don't care. And that's difficult for people to also understand that. And I wanted to lean into that, to your point earlier when you said like the whole football team illustration. I think is a great example and a great kind of way to look at it, because when we see those boys, we hear those boys, they behave like English lads in every way.
Yeah.
Culturally, there is no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But we struggle sometimes to like bring down, like, just because there's a diversity in colour or a diversity, like we might have a cultural connection to another country that we're not fully, but we really are in our heart. We really, really are, aren't we? And that's a really tough balance to get. And I love what you're saying in terms of, in order to mitigate that, we really take a sense of responsibility of my curiosity, find out why does that make me feel uncomfortable, because adjusting is different. You only know what you know. And
Yeah.
it's fearful to figure out something that looks so far away. But honestly, genuine friendship, I think, which you've spoken about, is a real bridge with that. I can be friends with so many, learning about their culture, sitting at their dinner table,
Yeah.
especially from a good place or a good heart posture of
Yeah.
curiosity and like genuine
Yeah.
care, because at the end of these are still human beings, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you don't have to necessarily, like, for example, if you speak with someone and maybe they raise their child a certain way or they have certain values, you don't have to necessarily agree with every single thing.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you can't be friends, doesn't mean you can't understand them. Maybe you won't understand it, maybe you just won't get it, and that's actually okay. And you can be comfortable just sort of living in that spot of like, I don't know. Like you can be in a bit of a gray area. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like, oh, unless I agree with you on every single thing, then we can't, be friends or whatever. And I just don't think that's the case. Yeah.
And I think like coming across conversations like this is a good starting point, because it's not, if you were to come across this conversation and hearing your example is someone who is stereotypically British in
Yeah.
like from the historical sense,
Mm-hmm.
or traditional sense, it's good to hear like this is what the tensions might be when you are in it. And I've lived that line, and this is already helpful to kind of like approaches we can adopt if we choose to. Alex, this has
Yeah.
been a really, really great conversation. I've just appreciated so much your honesty. And it's just been really authentically like simple. Yes, no, people are different, but I'm here for the
Yeah.
journey vibe. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for
If
having me.
you, yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to seeing you on hopefully some of our other conversations too. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
absolutely. Thank you. Bye.